Let's get started. Story number 1.
The trip was supposed to be a fun and relaxing escape, a way for Alex and Sarah to reconnect after months of busy schedules and hectic lives. They decided to take a road trip across the Midwest, away from the bustling city, hoping the quiet landscapes would offer them a much-needed break. They drove for hours, following the winding roads that seemed to stretch forever, with little more than open fields and occasional small towns scattered along the way. It had been a long day of driving, and the sun was beginning to set as they approached a remote stretch of highway. The road was long and desolate, with no signs of civilization in sight. Alex was behind the wheel, and Sarah had her feet propped up on the dashboard, scrolling through her phone. "Are you sure we should keep going?" Sarah asked, glancing at the darkening sky. "I don't know. This place feels kind of weird." Alex chuckled, keeping his eyes on the road. "What do you mean weird? It's just a little dark. We'll be in the next town in about 30 minutes. Sarah frowned, but didn't argue. She had felt a strange unease creeping up on her ever since they had turned onto this road, a stretch that seemed to stretch on endlessly with no signs of life. But she kept it to herself, unwilling to admit that she was beginning to feel uncomfortable. As they continued driving, the road grew more isolated, with no lights or houses to be seen. The only sounds were the low hum of the car's engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Alex glanced at the rearview mirror, noticing the absence of any cars behind them. "It's like we're the only ones out here," Alex said, his voice a little tense now. "It's kind of creepy," Sarah replied, her eyes darting to the side of the road. "I don't like how quiet it is. It feels off." They passed a faded road sign warning of a sharp turn ahead. As Alex slowed to take the curve, a flicker of movement caught Sarah's eye. She turned her head to the left and saw something in the distance, near the edge of the road. "Alex, did you see that?" she said, her voice suddenly sharp. Alex squinted, slowing down even more as they approached the area. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the headlights or some animal. But as they got closer, he could make out the outline of a figure. It was a person standing by the side of the road, a figure in a faded jacket, their back to them, staring into the darkness. "Who the hell is that?" Alex muttered under his breath. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Is that a person out here?" The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still, just watching them, as if waiting for them to come closer. Alex instinctively slowed down even more, the headlights illuminating the person as they passed. "Should we stop?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with hesitation. "Maybe they need help." Alex glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "I don't know. It's strange. It's like they're waiting for something." The car continued to roll past the figure, and as they passed, Alex stole another glance in the side mirror. The person hadn't moved at all. They were still standing there, unmoving, staring at the car. Alex's heart began to race. "Maybe we should just keep going," Sarah said, sounding more anxious now. "It's not like they're asking for help, and why would someone be standing out here, alone, in the middle of nowhere?" Alex didn't answer. He simply pressed the gas pedal, pushing the car forward, hoping to put distance between them and the eerie figure. Minutes passed, but neither of them spoke. The mood in the car grew tense as the atmosphere outside became darker and more oppressive. The headlights barely illuminated the road ahead, and the forest on both sides of the highway seemed to press in on them. Suddenly, the car's engine sputtered, jerking them both forward with a startling jolt. "What the hell?" Alex said, his voice rising. He glanced at the dashboard, his fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. "Come on, not now!" Sarah's stomach tightened as she stared out the windshield, her eyes scanning the dark road ahead. The car lurched again, and the headlights flickered before going completely dark. Alex's panicked breathing filled the silence, and the darkness around them felt suffocating. "We're stuck," Alex muttered. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. No, don't say that." Alex turned the key in the ignition, but the engine refused to start again. He tried again and again, but the car just wouldn't budge. He cursed under his breath, his frustration growing. "Maybe we should walk to the next town," Sarah said, her voice shaking now. "Just leave the car here and go. It can't be too far." Alex looked at her, his eyes wide with panic. "Walk? In this place? Are you crazy?" Sarah's eyes darted to the side mirror, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of dread. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the figure from earlier, standing in the distance again, this time much closer than before. It was the same person, still with their back to them, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. "Sarah," Alex said, his voice cracking. "It's not possible. We just passed that person. There's no way they could have caught up with us." Sarah didn't respond. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she turned to look at him. She could feel a cold, creeping sensation spreading through her body. It was as if something wasn't right, as if the world around them had shifted into a place that didn't quite follow the rules they knew. "Alex," she whispered, pointing at the figure again. "It's moving." Alex whipped his head around, his eyes bulging with disbelief. The person was walking toward them now, slowly, dragging their feet in an unnatural jerking motion. It was like they were floating, their legs barely lifting off the ground. Without thinking, Alex threw the car into reverse, slamming the gas pedal to the floor. The tires squealed, and the car jerked backward, but the headlights blinked back on. For a moment they were in the clear, until Alex saw the figure standing directly behind them in the rearview mirror, their pale face now visible. Their hollow, dark eyes were locked on them. The figure's lips curled into a faint smile, and Sarah's blood ran cold. It was not a human smile. It was an expression of something much darker, something that made her skin crawl with terror. "Go, Alex, now!" she screamed. Alex slammed the car into drive, and the tires spun as he sped away, not looking back. The figure remained in the rearview mirror for a moment longer, then disappeared into the darkness. They didn't stop driving until they reached the nearest town, a tiny dot on the map, illuminated by the flickering lights of a gas station. They pulled in, breathless and shaking. Alex got out of the car and walked into the small convenience store to get help, while Sarah sat frozen in the passenger seat, her hands clenched tightly into fists. When Alex returned, his face was pale, his expression unreadable. "You won't believe this," he said, voice low and shaky. Sarah swallowed, her heart still racing. "What?" "The clerk inside," he started. "He said there's a story about this road. A woman, well, some say she was a woman, others say she was something else, died here years ago. She was killed in a car accident on this stretch. People say her spirit haunts this road, waiting for the next car to come by." Sarah's eyes widened in terror. "You're saying she was the one?" Alex nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, she's the one who's been following us." Sarah turned to look out the window, but the road was now empty, silent, and dark. She couldn't shake the image of the figure in the rearview mirror. No matter how far they drove, it would never feel far enough. Story the end.
Story number 2.
We had been on the road for 3 days, winding through the back roads of the Midwest. The trip had started out like any other road trip, with our excitement and energy high, ready for the open road. I was with my 2 best friends, Mark and Olivia, and it was supposed to be the break we all needed. A week away from the city, a week of driving, camping, and exploring small towns. It was the kind of trip you dream about. A chance to disconnect, to just be with your friends, free from obligations. We started in Chicago, and our goal was to drive across the state, stopping in quirky towns and scenic spots, taking pictures, and seeing where the road would take us. By the 3rd day, we had reached a tiny, almost forgotten town called Pinewood. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked, with a single gas station, a diner that looked straight out of the 1950s, and a few scattered houses. The town wasn't even on most maps, but we'd found it online, recommended by a travel blog, as an off-the-beaten-path stop. We didn't intend to stay long, just to fill up the tank and grab a bite to eat. The sun was low in the sky as we pulled into the gas station. The place was quiet, too quiet. There were no other cars in sight. Even the air felt different, still and almost heavy, like it was holding its breath. Inside the gas station, the cashier, a man in his 50s, looked up from his newspaper when we walked in. His eyes were pale, his skin tight against his bones, and he greeted us with a curt nod. We exchanged pleasantries, then I paid for the gas, and we headed back to the car. As we were leaving, I glanced over my shoulder and saw a woman standing across the street in front of a rundown house. She was tall, thin, and wearing a faded white dress that almost blended into the pale light of the setting sun. Her long, dark hair hung loosely around her shoulders. She didn't move, just stood there, staring at us. I nudged Mark, who was getting into the driver's seat. "Hey, look at that woman," I said. Mark glanced over, then quickly got into the car. "Weird," he muttered, starting the engine. Olivia, who was sitting in the back seat, didn't seem to notice. We drove off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the woman. She just stared, unmoving, as we pulled away. As we continued down the road, I tried to put it out of my mind. It's just a small town. Maybe she's just standing there. People do that, right? I said, trying to convince myself. But the oddness lingered, like an itch I couldn't scratch. We didn't talk much on the drive after that. The road ahead seemed longer than it should have been, and the trees surrounding us looked dark and dense, their branches bending low. It was like we had entered some sort of strange, suspended reality. The radio wasn't working, static filling the air every time we tried to turn it on. Eventually, we came upon a dirt road off the main highway, a sign barely visible that read "Scenic Overlook" in chipped paint. Mark, always the one to push for adventure, suggested we take a quick detour to check it out. "We can't let the trip be all driving. Let's stop for a minute, get out, stretch our legs," he said. Olivia agreed, and I reluctantly nodded. I wasn't sure why, but the thought of stopping felt wrong, like we shouldn't be there. Still, I kept my mouth shut as Mark turned the car onto the dirt road. It twisted and turned, the tires crunching against the gravel as the trees pressed in tighter. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow across everything. We reached the overlook, but instead of the beautiful view I expected, the place felt unsettling. The overlook was just a small clearing on the side of the road with a few benches facing a large, overgrown field. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the forest were unnervingly quiet. There were no birds, no insects, just the faint rustling of leaves. "Weird," Mark said, stepping out of the car. "I thought there would be more to it." "Let's just take a quick look and head back," Olivia said, already opening the car door. I hesitated, but got out as well, my feet dragging as I walked toward the clearing. There was something off about this place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I stood there, staring out at the overgrown field, when I caught a flicker of movement at the far edge. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again. A figure, tall, draped in white, standing just outside the tree line. I froze. It was the woman from the gas station. "She's back," I whispered, too quiet for Mark or Olivia to hear. I turned quickly to look at them, but when I turned back to the field, she was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. "What?" Mark asked, turning around to face me. "The woman, the one from the gas station, she's standing in the field." Mark and Olivia both turned to look, but the field was empty. "There's nothing there," Olivia said, sounding confused. My pulse raced as I scanned the area. She was there. She was standing in the field right there by the trees. "You're just spooked from the long drive," Mark said, giving me a reassuring smile. "Let's head back to the car. You're imagining things." I wasn't convinced. Something about this place didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to look foolish, so I nodded and followed them back to the car. As we drove away, the unease gnawed at me, a sense of being watched, like there was something behind us. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman standing in the middle of the road staring at us. But the road was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We continued down the highway, the night settling in around us. The headlights cut through the darkness, and the sound of the tires on the pavement was oddly loud in the stillness. And then, without warning, the car jerked. "What the hell?" Mark shouted, pulling over to the side of the road. We all got out, and I immediately saw what had happened. The back tire was flat. We stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. There were no other cars in sight, and the town we'd passed was miles behind us. Mark opened the trunk to pull out the spare tire, but as he did, I heard something. A faint sound at first, barely audible over the rustling of the trees. It was a whisper. I turned toward the woods, straining to hear. The whisper grew louder, clearer. It was a woman's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Leave. Now." I felt my blood run cold. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" Olivia asked, looking at me like I was crazy. The whisper, I said. The woman's voice. Mark straightened up, looking at me with concern. We need to get out of here. This is getting weird. I nodded, and we quickly piled back into the car. Mark started the engine, and without another word, we drove off, leaving the flat tire behind. The voice, the whisper, echoed in my mind as we sped away. It wasn't until we reached the next town that we finally pulled over to fix the tire. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. I kept my eyes on the road, every flicker of light in the trees making me jump. The rest of the trip was a blur, and we never spoke of Pinewood again. But every now and then, in the quiet of the night, I hear it, the whisper. Leave. Now. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I didn't believe in ghosts. I always thought the stories were exaggerated, fueled by imagination or the strange ways our minds play tricks on us when we're tired or scared. That was until I took a road trip through the Midwest with my friend Jenna. We had planned this trip for months. 2 friends, a rented car, and an open highway. No destinations, just driving to clear our heads and explore the vastness of the country. The first few days were exactly what we had hoped for. Long drives through scenic landscapes, roadside diners, and plenty of laughter. But as we pushed deeper into rural America, things started to change. It wasn't anything overt at first, just a growing sense of discomfort. The towns we passed through seemed emptier than they should have been. The roads grew quieter, isolated. We'd go hours without seeing another car. The air felt heavier in the evenings, and the silence on the open road grew unsettling. It was on the 4th night, after a particularly long stretch of highway through the Nebraska plains, that things took a turn. We had been driving for hours, the darkness closing in around us. The gas gauge was hovering near empty, and we hadn't seen any signs for a gas station in what felt like an eternity. How much further? Jenna asked, glancing over at me from the passenger seat. I'm not sure, I said, squinting at the road signs ahead. There's a town coming up in a few miles, I think. We should be fine. But as we continued, the miles stretched on without any sign of the town. My stomach tightened, a growing sense of unease creeping over me. I glanced at the gas gauge again, then at the empty road. Hey, are you sure we're going the right way? Jenna asked, her voice tense now. Yeah, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. I think the town's just a bit further down. We'll get there. Minutes passed, but the empty road stretched out in front of us without any sign of civilization, just fields and darkness. We need to pull over, Jenna said suddenly. This is too much. I frowned, feeling the same rising anxiety. Yeah, maybe you're right. Let me just find a place to stop. I eased the car to the side of the road, turning off the engine. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the dry grass and the distant howls of coyotes. There was no sign of any lights in the distance, no flicker of a town. This is strange, I muttered, looking at my phone. No signal. Jenna's voice was shaky. This is freaking me out. Why are we so far from everything? How is this even possible? I nodded, unable to offer an explanation. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on us. After a few minutes of sitting in the car, I looked over at Jenna. Let's walk around a bit. Maybe there's a small town just beyond that hill. Jenna looked hesitant, but nodded. I guess, but I don't like this. We stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air hitting us immediately. The sky was clear, the stars sharp and bright, but it only made the vast emptiness around us seem more surreal. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, but there was nothing. No lights, no houses, no signs of life. We're not even on a proper road, Jenna said, frowning as she looked at the cracked asphalt. This doesn't feel right. I agreed. But there was a strange pull to move forward. I don't know why, but I felt an urge to walk, to find something, anything, that would break the eerie stillness. We walked for about 10 minutes along the shoulder of the highway, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under our feet. But after a while I stopped, looking ahead. There in the distance was a figure, a person, standing motionless in the middle of the road. Do you see that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jenna turned her head, her face going pale. Oh my God, who is that? I couldn't answer. The figure was too far away, and we couldn't make out any details, but it was standing still, not moving, just facing us. Should we go closer? Jenna asked, fear creeping into her voice. I hesitated. Something about the scene was unsettling, But curiosity, or maybe something else, drove me forward. We need to see if they need help. We walked closer, though every step felt wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. The night air felt colder now, pressing in from all sides. When we were about 20 feet away, the figure finally stirred. It turned slightly, enough for us to see its face. My blood went cold. It wasn't a person at all. The figure's face was pale, unnaturally so, and its eyes were wide, hollow, black. There was no expression, no emotion in its gaze. Just darkness. The clothes it wore were torn, old, as though they had been there for years, maybe decades. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the ground, my breath caught in my chest. Jenna started backing up slowly, her face ashen. Do you think we should... Before she could finish her sentence, the figure opened its mouth. It wasn't a voice I could describe. It wasn't human. It was a sound, like scraping metal or a distant scream trapped inside a wall. The noise seemed to vibrate in my bones, making my heart race. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I wanted to, but my body wouldn't obey. Suddenly, the figure stepped toward us, slowly, deliberately. The air grew colder with each movement. Then it stopped. Inches from me, I felt a cold breath on my neck. Something behind me. And then, without thinking, I turned, pulling Jenna by the arm. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted back to the car, my lungs burning, the pounding of our feet against the road drowned out by the sound of the wind rushing past our ears. Behind us, the figure didn't follow, but we could feel its presence, looming, heavy, like it was watching us, following our every move. I grabbed the keys from my pocket and fumbled with the door handle, finally yanking it open and throwing myself into the driver's seat. Jenna was right behind me, and I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I started the engine. The car roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, tearing down the road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We drove for what felt like hours, the headlights illuminating nothing but endless, dark roads. Neither of us spoke, both of us too terrified to say anything, too afraid to break the silence. Eventually, we saw the first signs of civilization, lights from a distant town on the horizon. By then, the unease had faded into exhaustion, and we both remained silent, too shaken to speak. It wasn't until we reached the town and stopped for gas that we finally gathered the courage to talk. The attendant, an older man with a tired face, noticed our pale, shaken expressions and asked if everything was okay. We got lost, I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice faltered. There was a person out there. The man didn't react at first, his eyes narrowing. You weren't on Highway 72, were you? I nodded slowly, confused. Yeah. But how did you know? He sighed deeply. There's been talk of things like that for years. People see figures out there sometimes. No one knows what they are. I wouldn't go driving around out there at night, not without a good reason. Some things don't let you leave. I didn't say another word. The memory of the figure still haunted me, its hollow eyes and chilling presence lingering like a shadow over everything. I didn't know what I had seen, but it was enough to change the way I looked at the world. Ghosts or not, something was out there, and sometimes it waits for you to wander too close. The end.
Story number 4.
It started out like any other road trip. My best friend Emily and I were headed down to the coast for a much-needed break. We'd been friends since college, and after a stressful few months of work, we decided to take a week off to just drive, explore, and unwind. The plan was simple. No destination in mind, just the open road and whatever small towns we'd stumble upon along the way. We left early one Friday morning, the sun just starting to rise, casting a golden glow over the empty highway. The air was crisp, and the world seemed to be waking up along with us. We had our music playlist ready, snacks packed, and a sense of excitement in our hearts. Emily was driving, and I had the map. Or at least, I thought I did. We were heading down Route 66, a route both of us had wanted to take for years. It was the perfect day. We stopped at small towns, checked out quirky diners, took pictures by old gas stations, and talked about everything and nothing. By the time the sun began to set on the second day, we were nearing a small town we had never heard of, Hollow Creek. We hadn't planned to stop, but the sight of the sun setting behind the rolling hills was so beautiful that we decided to pull into a gas station to take a break. The gas station was old, worn down, and almost completely deserted. There was a single car parked by the pumps, but no one was inside. The station itself was dimly lit with dusty windows and peeling paint. I felt a strange sense of discomfort as soon as we pulled in, but I shrugged it off. We were on the road, and a little weirdness was to be expected. Emily went to the pumps, and I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs. I noticed a small diner across the street, a flickering neon sign above the door. Hollow Creek Diner, it read. I pointed it out to Emily, and she nodded. We'll grab a bite once we finish here. I was scanning the surroundings when something caught my eye. There was a woman standing at the edge of the parking lot, near the trees. She was staring at us. Her long, dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she was dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, like something you'd see in a black and white photo from the 1940s. She didn't look like she belonged in this day and age, and there was something unsettling about the way she stood there, motionless, just watching us. I blinked, and when I looked again, she was gone. Did you see that? I asked Emily, my voice tinged with unease. She glanced up, following my gaze, but there was no one there. What are you talking about? The woman, I said, frowning. She was standing right there by the trees. Emily looked puzzled. Maybe you're just tired. It's been a long drive. I nodded, but I wasn't so sure. It wasn't like I'd imagined it. It had been real, and it had felt strange. But Emily was right. Maybe I was just overthinking things. We finished up at the pumps, and I followed her across the street to the diner. The diner was cozy, though a little rundown, just like the gas station. It was empty, except for a man sitting at the counter, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. A waitress with graying hair greeted us with a thin smile and showed us to a booth by the window. We sat down and ordered coffee, though the place felt a little too quiet for my liking. The waitress didn't seem too talkative, and neither did the man at the counter. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was just going through the motions. It wasn't a comforting silence. It was as if the air in the diner was holding something back. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see the woman again, but there was nothing. Just the fading light of the day and the darkening trees surrounding the town. We ate our food in silence, the unease growing as the minutes passed. Finally, Emily spoke, breaking the silence. I don't know what it is, but this place is giving me the creeps, she said, her voice low. I nodded. Same here, there's just something off about it. After we finished, we paid the bill and left. The night had fallen completely by the time we stepped outside, and the streetlights were dim. The air was cooler now, and the town felt even quieter. We got into the car, and I suggested that we try to get to the next town before it got too late. Emily agreed, and we started the car, pulling back onto the main road. But as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The streetlights seemed to flicker as we passed, casting strange shadows that seemed to follow us. I kept checking the rearview mirror, almost expecting to see someone or something back there, but it was always empty. We drove for about 10 minutes when I noticed something strange. A car, dark and unmarked, had appeared behind us. It was too far away to make out details, but I could see the headlights getting brighter, coming closer. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I had this sinking feeling in my stomach. The car was tailing us, just a little too close. Em, do you see that? I asked, my voice tight. Emily glanced in the mirror. Yeah, I see it, but it's probably just someone driving through. I wasn't convinced. The car behind us wasn't like the other vehicles on the road. There was no sound of it accelerating or braking, no sign of any other cars nearby. It was just there, too close, and its headlights shone with an eerie intensity. I watched as the car kept getting closer, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone. I jerked my head around, trying to catch a glimpse of the road behind us, but there was nothing. Did you see that? The car, it just disappeared, I said, my voice shaking now. Emily was pale, her hands gripping the steering wheel. What the hell is going on? This place is messed up. I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing as we drove faster, desperate to get out of the town, but the feeling of being followed didn't go away. Every time I glanced behind us, I half expected to see that dark car, but there was never anything there. As we reached the edge of Hollow Creek, I thought we were finally getting out. But then, just as we were about to leave the town, the same woman I'd seen earlier, dressed in that old-fashioned white dress, suddenly appeared in the middle of the road. Her face was pale and expressionless, and her eyes locked onto ours. She didn't move, just stood there, watching us with an unnerving stillness. "Emily, stop!" I screamed. Emily slammed on the brakes, but there was no time to react. The woman was too close. Just as the car was about to hit her, she vanished. I looked around, my heart pounding. There was no sign of her. The road was empty. The town behind us looked just as quiet as before, almost like we hadn't left. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Emily didn't answer immediately. Her hands were shaking on the wheel, and she was staring ahead, her face pale. "I don't know what the hell that was," she muttered, her voice shaky. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. The rest of the road trip was uneventful, but Hollow Creek stayed with us. When we made it to the next town, we stopped at a gas station and told the attendant about our experience. He listened. He listened without saying much, then nodded. "People have seen strange things around Hollow Creek," he said. "It's not the kind of place you want to hang around after dark." We left as quickly as we could. I've never gone back to Hollow Creek, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see that woman standing in the road, staring at me. Story, the end.
Story number 5.
The road trip was supposed to be an adventure, a break from the mundane routines of daily life. My cousin Sarah and I had always talked about taking a trip like this, driving from Texas to New Mexico with no particular destination in mind. We were both in our late 20s, working full-time jobs, and feeling like we needed a change of pace. So one weekend, we packed our bags, jumped in her beat-up Jeep, and hit the road. It was a sunny Saturday morning when we left. The highways stretched endlessly ahead, the familiar hum of the tires against the road lulling us into a sense of freedom. We passed through small towns, stopping at local diners and quirky roadside attractions. The weather was perfect, and the world seemed to be moving at a slow, pleasant pace. By late afternoon, we found ourselves on a small 2-lane highway that cut through the heart of the desert. The sky was beginning to darken, the sun casting long shadows over the cracked, empty road. We hadn't seen another car for hours, and the landscape around us felt eerily silent, just the occasional scrub brush and the vast emptiness stretching out in all directions. I noticed that the air was getting colder, and there was an odd stillness to the place, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking the silence. "Feel what?" I replied, glancing over at her. She frowned, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "It's just, I don't know. It feels like we're being watched, like there's something out there." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't deny that there was an unsettling vibe to the place. I wasn't usually one to get spooked, but even I felt a little uncomfortable. We hadn't passed a gas station or a town in hours, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. Just as I was about to suggest we stop at a small gas station up ahead, Sarah slammed on the brakes. The Jeep came to a screeching halt, and I was thrown forward, my seatbelt catching me just in time. "Jesus, Sarah! What the hell?" She was staring out the windshield, her face pale. I followed her gaze and saw what had stopped her. A figure was standing in the middle of the road, just a few hundred yards ahead. At first, I thought it was some kind of mirage. The figure was tall, dressed in what looked like a long, flowing white robe. The figure was motionless, standing perfectly still in the middle of the highway. Its face was hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, and the figure seemed to blend into the dusky light around it, almost if it didn't belong in this world. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "It's not normal." I felt a cold chill run through me. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, motionless, like it was waiting for us. My heart began to pound in my chest, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Should we turn around?" I asked, suddenly feeling the overwhelming need to get away. Sarah didn't respond right away. She was frozen, her eyes fixed on the figure. I could see her hands trembling on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure stepped to the side of the road. It didn't walk. It just glided, moving in a way that seemed completely unnatural. I could feel my breath catch in my throat as it moved. its presence more unsettling the closer it got. "Go," I said, my voice tight with fear. Sarah slammed the gear shift into reverse and sped backward down the road, her tires screeching as she swerved to avoid the figure. The Jeep bounced over the uneven road as we raced away from whatever that thing was. We didn't say anything for a long time. Sarah kept driving, her knuckles still white, and I stared out the window, half expecting to see the figure reappear in the rearview mirror. But it never did. The road behind us was empty. Eventually, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I said, still trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. "But I've never seen anything like it." We drove for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us growing thicker by the minute. I kept glancing nervously at the road behind us, but the figure never reappeared. The further we drove, the more I tried to convince myself that it had just been some kind of trick of the light, maybe a person in an odd outfit or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. After a while, the quiet was broken by the low rumble of Sarah's stomach. She laughed nervously, the sound breaking the tension in the car. "Guess it's time to eat. We should have stopped earlier." "Yeah," I agreed, though I wasn't really hungry. I just wanted to get to the next town, find a place to stay, and forget about the figure in the road. We drove on for another hour, eventually coming across a small town that looked deserted. The houses were run down, and there wasn't a soul in sight. We found a small diner, its neon sign flickering weakly. We parked the Jeep and went inside, hoping for something normal, just a hot meal and maybe a little distraction. The diner was empty except for the elderly man behind the counter. He didn't seem surprised to see us, but there was something about the way he looked at us that made me uncomfortable. His eyes were dark, almost too dark, and he had a strange, knowing expression on his face. "Evening, ladies," he said in a deep, gravelly voice. "You two traveling far? We're just passing through," Sarah replied, trying to keep the conversation casual. He nodded slowly, his eyes flickering between the two of us. "It's dangerous to be out on the road at night. Not many people make it through these parts." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, his voice low. "This place, it's not as it seems. There's a reason it's so quiet. People see things out here, things that don't belong." A shiver ran down my spine. "What kind of things?" The man's eyes darkened. "Things you'd rather not know about." We sat in uncomfortable silence, the air thick with tension. The old man didn't say anything else, and we didn't push him for more information. When we finished eating, we paid and left quickly, eager to put some distance between us and that strange diner. As we drove out of town, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. The road stretched out ahead, and the lights of the town grew dim in the rearview mirror. But something felt off. It was like there was something just beyond the edge of my vision, something watching us. I kept glancing nervously at the road behind us, but all I could see were the empty stretches of highway. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice quiet. "Do you think we'll ever be able to leave this place?" I didn't know how to answer. It was as if the town, the desert, the strange figure, everything was closing in on us. We drove on through the night, unsure of where we were headed, but desperate to get away from the eerie quiet that seemed to follow us. As we drove, I glanced at the rearview mirror once more. The empty highway stretched out behind us, but in the distance I thought I saw something. A figure standing in the middle of the road, just like before. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop the car. Now." But when she hit the brakes, we were already past it. The road was empty. We never spoke of it again. After that night, the road trip ended abruptly. We found a town far away from that place, booked a motel, and ended our journey. We never spoke about the figure, the man at the diner, or the feeling that something had followed us. But every now and then, when I drive alone through the desert, I can't help but look over my shoulder, and I wonder if we ever truly left that place behind. Story, the end.